Hello everybody and welcome to another chapter of The Witcher Book Club. And this week we are diving into chapter 3 of Blood of Elves. So grab your drink, I have mine right here. Grab yourself a drink, sit back, and let's dive into chapter 3. By the way, this should go without saying, but there will be spoilers for many things about The Witcher in these series. I may talk about some things that are revealed in the chapter that may foreshadow to things in the future. I don't want to get too deep into the spoiler territory, but I do like to kind of foreshadow or touch on those kinds of things. And, I may talk about things that are speculated or even revealed in the Witcher show. So just, if you're not into spoilers, you might just want to watch with caution. So, chapter 3 of Blood of Elves. This chapter, I feel like it starts very explosive and then kind of dies down and is not as exciting later in the chapter. But I feel that it's still good nonetheless. Blood of Elves in general isn't the most exciting book of the series, and it's unfortunate because it's the first of the saga. So I've talked to a lot of people who have not fully read the Witcher books. I have friends who've played the games or watched the show, and then they really want to get into the books. Obviously, you should start with the short stories, but some of them, want to just dive deep into the saga and get to some of the interesting stuff that's going to happen in the show. So they start reading Blood of Elves, and if you're expecting the Witcher universe, or at least, some of the Witcher books to be a bunch of, Geralt fighting a bunch of monsters and a lot of action and monster slaying, that's not really what happens in the books, and specifically in Blood of Elves. If you're expecting a lot of cool monster slaying, it doesn't really happen in this book. But if you really love the world of The Witcher and you love the characters, there's a lot of good character building and foundational stuff that does happen in this book, and specifically in this chapter. And if you like The Witchers in general, I think this is a really good chapter. Also, again, don't mind if you see me looking down. I'm referring to the notes that I wrote for this chapter. So we open with Triss and the Witchers discussing the severity of Siris Power, and we learn that she is a source, which Triss describes as she's a powerful medium, she's able to prophesize, and describes it as very dangerous. First of all, everybody in Kaer Morhen is very opinionated. I'm just going to get that out there. There's a lot of opinions, very strong opinions by many of the people in Kaer Morhen, and we'll touch more on that later in the chapter. As Triss is describing all of this, everybody kind of has their views on Ciri and her power. Triss obviously thinks that it's powerful and dangerous, and if left untouched, that it could lead to danger for Ciri and for people around her. Lambert, on the other hand, in his usual self, doesn't think much of Ciri's power and views Ciri as just a normal girl. I mean, hell, she can't even do basic Witcher signs like Ard and Axii and Igni. She can't even do that little bit of magic. And the Witchers use magic, but they use a very small portion of it compared to what a sorceress could do. And so, Lambert's like, well, she can't even do that, Marigold. By the way, he's continuing to call Triss Marigold, which he knows she doesn't like, and he's doing it on purpose. Geralt, though, he understands Triss's concerns, and he admits that, he's seen this power in play. And he references a previous encounter that he had with Pavetta, who is Ciri's mother. And if you have read the short stories, this does reference back to a question of price. Once again, citing why it's very important to read the short stories before you get into the saga, because it taps on things that are referenced very subtly, but you get a little glimpse of that. So yeah, Geralt has seen these powers in play. Pavetta nearly destroyed an entire banquet with her power. They're all kind of discussing their views on Ciri and her ability as a source. And here's where things get very interesting. First, the Witchers mention that they've seen her do weird things multiple times at this point. They're describing it a bit to Triss, some of the things that they've seen her do. One of the most interesting things that she's done is prophesize death. Specifically, she's prophesied death for Cohen and Geralt. Very interesting. Keep that little tidbit of information in your mind for the future. I'll say no more. So next, Triss decides it's time to take matters into her own hands. I don't think I'll ever fully understand why Triss does what she's about to do, because it seems like it's a very dangerous move, but maybe she just feels like she trusts her own ability. But what she does is she gives Ciri some white seagull that previously got Ciri to go into one of her trances. And they know that this triggers that, but Triss decides to give it to Ciri anyway to immediately trigger one of these trances. Triss has a plan. She's going to use her magic to tap into this trance that Ciri is having. But to me, I'm like, man, this seems very dangerous. As Triss was just going off about the dangers of this power, and she decides she's going to take matters into her own hands and try to do it. But we get to the next part of this chapter, which happens to be my favorite part of the chapter, where Ciri begins to do her prophetic nature, and Triss gets to get a little glimpse of that. So for this moment, we're transported away from Kaer Morhen to an ocean, seagulls, the place where Triss has channeled her magic to enter into Ciri's trance. And this part is absolutely chilling. At some moments, it seems like Ciri is talking to Triss, and she begins spouting these words that don't really make much sense to us just yet. The white flame, blood of elves. Finally, this voice, which calls Triss 14th one, similar to what that voice called her in chapter 2, says that Ciri is the elder blood, Ted Direit. Similar words to what we read in Ithleen's prophecy at the beginning of the book. What does this all mean yet? It's hard to say, especially for a first-time reader. It still doesn't make full sense what all of this means. What is the white flame, the blood of elves? Elder blood, Ciri's connection to elder blood. What does it all mean just yet? We don't know. But we know for certain that Ciri's prophetic power is very similar to the oracle, the seer, Ithleen, an elven seer that we read in the earlier chapter. After this bone-chilling trance, Triss is awakened by Geralt, and there's some very interesting dialogue between Triss and Geralt. Triss realizes that this was, very, very dangerous. Yeah, good job, Triss. Geralt needs to seek a powerful sorceress, and you know of whom I speak, she even says. Triss admits that Geralt needs Yennefer for this. I think it's a very humbling moment and a very real moment. Triss has her own motives. She has her own selfish desires. This is true. Deep down, she knows what's needed, and she knows that Yennefer probably has more abilities that can help Ciri right now than she can, and she admits that. And Geralt gets to kind of finally admit his feelings for Yennefer to Triss, essentially friend-zoning her, for real this time. So there's one part of the dialogue that I think is very funny. Triss is very vulnerable in this moment, and she says to Geralt, "I was your mistake, nothing more." And instead of, Geralt doesn't say "No, Triss, you weren't a mistake, we were good," or whatever. I don't think he means it this way, but this is how I read it. "Mistakes," he said with effort, "are also important to me. I don't cross them out of my life or my memory." So he's basically saying, yeah, Triss, you were a mistake, but mistakes are important, so don't worry. I don't know. I read it kind of funny, because imagine somebody coming to you and saying "Oh, what we had, I was just a mistake." And sometimes you try to be nice and you console them and you say, no, you weren't a mistake. Geralt's admitting, nope, this was a mistake. But it's okay. Mistakes happen, and it's still important, and it's still an important part of our life. Triss says, "You love her that much?" she stated, not asking. And he says that much, he admitted in a whisper, in a moment of silence. So he admits that he really does love Yennefer. So yeah, it's a good moment for the two of them to have. Triss decides to stay till spring. And in the spring, they will take Ciri to live in the Temple of Melitele, where she can kind of have her normal child upbringing that they really want her to have, rather than being like an isolated hermit in Kaer Morhen with the Witchers. So Triss stays for a while and hangs out with Ciri and continues to be that feminine touch in Kaer Morhen that I think they also desperately need. So the next part of the chapter is a bit of a montage. We get a montage of all of the Kaer Morhen folk and their interactions with Ciri and how different their bonding is with Ciri. So the Witchers and Triss. I really like this section, even though it can be a bit on the slow side, because it does give us an idea of how each of the characters nurture Ciri in their own way. Lambert, who is training with her, kind of giving her that tough love that he always, that prickly side that he always has to him. He definitely doesn't hold back even with Ciri. Triss, who is, spending time with her and showing her how to apply makeup and, teaching her elder speech. They have this very close bond that continues to flourish while she's staying in Kaer Morhen. Vesemir, who of course is more of the uncle figure, is reading Ghouls and Owlghouls to Ciri. I make jokes about Vesemir saying, you should have read your Ghouls and Owlghouls. That's something that's referenced in the game. Where Vesemir is very staunch on studying the Witcher lore. Vesemir's a lore nerd. He's like, you can't just fight the monsters, you need to study the monsters. And he's doing that with Ciri in this chapter, and it always puts a little smile to my face, because that's, how I always viewed Vesemir, and one thing that I think the game got really right about his character. Cohen, who's also training with Ciri, gives her a little bit of dark humor where he says, all the heroes or whatever that he meets are in cemeteries. But he's trying to teach her, a kind of hard life lesson in his own, in his own way. And of course, Geralt, who's training with her on the pendulum, we get a bit of a longer montage where we really get to see Geralt's parenting skills put to play. I think that's one of my favorite things about Blood of Elves, is we really get to see parent Geralt, dad Geralt, and it's very heartwarming. His training is a lot more thorough with Ciri and a lot more, life lesson-y too. I just kind of very much enjoyed that little bit of the parenting that Geralt gives to Ciri. So the final part of this chapter is where we once again get into those very strong opinions that I was talking about earlier regarding the Witchers and Triss. It cuts to some time later where everybody's at dinner, having dinner while, Triss is still staying there, and they begin talking about the one thing that you shouldn't talk about during dinner time, and that's politics. This part kind of reminds me of like a Thanksgiving dinner that you would have with family members, and some topic gets brought up and everybody gets kind of really heated. As we just came out of Thanksgiving here in the US, it kind of just reminded me of that. Triss is kind of talking about the state of the world and how Nilfgaard has been, making their way across the northern kingdoms. Triss serves King Foltest as a, advisor, talking about how something needs to be done about what's happening in the world right now, especially with Nilfgaard. Geralt goes into his whole neutral Witcher philosophy that we've heard quite a few times and will continue to hear more in the future. He says, "We're Witchers, Triss. Can't you understand that?" "What's there to understand?" the Enchantress tossed her chestnut mane back. "Everything's crystal clear. You've chosen a certain attitude to the world around you. The fact that this world might at any moment fall to pieces has a place in this choice. In mine, it doesn't. That's where we differ." "I'm not sure it's only there we differ." "The world is falling to ruins," she repeated. "We can watch it happen and do nothing, or we can counteract it." "How?" he smiled. "With our emotions?" Once again, getting into this whole thing where Triss is being emotional, and it's like, guys, It's not about emotions. She's just trying to take certain stance and try to do something about what's happening to the world. And Lambert chimes in and he's like, oh, you know, people say the world's going to shit, and that's because it's what merchants say. Basically, he's saying it's like greedy politicians. Like, it's very true to the real world. Even though this is a fantasy world, there's a lot of similar issues that we can correlate to the real world, where it's like, people will use the times of war, or, you know, saying the world is going to hell, but it's really, you know, these politicians or merchants or kings who are trying to influence their politics onto income. Tris, relax, don't believe all of this stuff. You know, it's just what people say to try to get you to pay more money to the world, to the rich, or whatever. And Tris is, you know, trying to call them to action, but Geralt really challenges her here, and he says, what do you expect from me? To take an active part in the fight to save a world which is falling to pieces? Am I to enlist into the army to stop Nilfgaard? Should I, if it comes to another battle for Sodden, stand with you on the hill, shoulder to shoulder, and fight for freedom? I'd be proud, she said quietly, lowering her head. I'd be proud and happy to fight at your side. I believe that, but I'm not gallant enough, nor valiant enough. I'm not suited to be a soldier or a hero. I'm a witcher, an artificially created mutant. I kill monsters for money. I defend children when their parents pay me to. If Nilfgaardian parents pay me, I'll defend Nilfgaardian children. And even if the world lies in ruin, which does not seem likely to me, I'll carry on killing monsters in the ruins of this world until some monster kills me. That is my fate, my reason, my life, and my attitude to the world. And it is not what I choose, it is what was chosen for me. Tris is surprised at his lack of motivation. He's seen some of the horrible things that have happened at Trans River. He knows what happened to Cintra, what happened to Queen Calanthe, what happened to the girl he's raising, grandmother. He knows what happened, yet he will stand here and do nothing. And she goes off, you know. She's talking about, I'm a magician, why should I care? But I do care, and I fought alongside those mages at Sodden. She's seen firsthand what has happened, and she's really getting into it. And Geralt's like, all right, let's stop, okay? Let's stop. And she's like, no, you know what? I'm going into this. And she gets really into the gritty, gruesome details of the Battle of Sodden Hill, depicting Coral's death. Coral was another mage. How she saw her own blood on herself, and Yennefer, who was blinded, and everything that happened to her. She goes deep into it, and it's clearly making Geralt uncomfortable. She's trying to challenge his very narrow worldview on being a witcher. Then Ciri, who wasn't immediately in this conversation, I guess she comes in later, and she's like, I will help you, Tris. I want to defend people, and I want to be a hero, and I want to kill the people who killed my grandmother. I mean, her grandmother committed suicide, but the people who attacked Cintra. She's like, I want to defend, you know, my people, Cintra, and kill Nilfgaard. And Geralt gets very upset by this. Basically says, you've learned nothing if you take up the sword and what you want to do is kill Ciri. So you ain't training anymore. He gives that tough love dad moment to Ciri, where she's a young 12-year-old girl who has a very limited view on the world. She's seen what she's seen. She's seen her people suffer, and she wants to defend them. And she's very much like, I want to kill Nilfgaard. And Geralt's like, no, if that's what you want to do, I'm taking the sword away. It's not about killing. This is where the conversation comes a bit to a halt. And things start to die down a little bit, because Geralt, I think, gets very upset in this moment. It's like that awkward moment where the dad yells at the kid and everybody's kind of quiet, and it's like, okay. Ciri gets very upset by this and storms off. Tris gets upset. It's a whole mess. Vesemir even says, too severe, Wolf. Much too severe. And you shouldn't have done it in Tris's presence. He gets so upset that he even calls Tris just Marigold. He very derogatorily says this to Tris because he's so fed up with her and calls her Marigold. And it's kind of messed up. But he immediately realizes what he did wrong, and he apologizes. And Ciri, who stormed off and is kind of Ciri is, you know, very upset by Geralt's words and says, "No one's going to take the sword away from me," she shouted. "No one, not even you." And they have this moment where they kind of make up, but Ciri is still upset by Geralt's words. She feels very strongly. She has very strong convictions at this young age about what she wants to do. It's a very good moment to end the chapter with, because again, it's that tender father-daughter relationship that Geralt and Ciri have, and we get to see a little bit more of that and how Geralt handles it and how Ciri, you know, handles everything. I really liked it. So that ends the chapter 3 of Blood of Elves. So let's quickly talk about what we saw in this chapter and what we might see in Season 2 of The Witcher Netflix. By the way, Season 2 is coming up real quick, so, you know, we're only going to find out in just a couple of weeks now what we might see. So if you're watching this after Season 2, you can, you know, make fun of me and say none of that happened. Lol, you're wrong. But I'm just going to talk about my predictions because we're getting closer to the season at the time of me recording this. First of all, yes, we better see some of that cool prophecy in Season 2. I think we know that Ciri is going to prophesize. I think there's even, there was a note that the Wild Hunt might actually appear in Season 2. And I'm pretty sure that has to do with something that Ciri prophesizes, and we'll see a glimpse of that. So I'm really hoping we see this prophecy from Ciri is one of the coolest ones, I think, and that depiction of like a beach with water and the seagull and Triss standing there and seeing Ciri talking in this creepy voice. I really hope we see that. I'm sure we'll get a glimpse of Ciri and her relationship with all of the Witchers. We know Eskel, Lambert, Cohen, Geralt, Vesemir, they're all going to be at Kaer Morhen. They're all going to be training, and I hope to see some of these different relationships between Ciri and the Witchers training, and we see that actually in the show. I assume Triss will be at Kaer Morhen with everybody. I don't know if we'll get like a heated political discussion. We might. I think it would be great to have that because, again, we can really touch on that whole Witchers take a neutral stance on everything while the political climate of the world is going to shit. I personally really like that, and I hope that we do get to see that. So that is everything for me as far as Chapter 3 goes for Blood of Elves. I hope you all enjoyed just having a little discussion with me. We will be getting into Chapter 4 very soon, and it's a really good one, so you don't want to miss Chapter 4. We only have a few chapters left. There's only 7 chapters. This one was a bit shorter. Chapter 4 is a bit of a long one, so we'll get into that soon. Thanks everybody for watching. I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.